to the screen so we can see everybody. Just give a minute for everybody to get settled. It's wonderful to see some familiar faces, some new ones. And in South Africa today, we're having national connections problem with the internet. So I think some people will be in and out with that. But I'd like to welcome you to Women's Entrepreneurship, Africa's Next Juggernaut, which is hosted by Catalyst 2030. We're set for an engaging and candid roundtable discussion this afternoon. And were it not for COVID-19, we'd probably be meeting in a large plenary session somewhere fully dressed instead of being dressed only from the waist up, or well, that's at least me. So you've all been muted, and if you have any questions, if you can put them in the chat, we'll address them at the end. Also, if you wouldn't just mind putting your name and where you're calling from, broadcasting from in the chat, and who you work for, to give an idea of a sense of where everybody is. The call is also being recorded. Okay with that? Great. I'm Christine Pearson, and I'm the founder and head of Lifeline Energy, the world's only nonprofit that designs, manufactures, and distributes solar and wind media players and radios for the humanitarian and aid sector. Over the past 21 years, nearly 700,000 products have been distributed, reaching many, many millions of listeners, mainly women, children, and refugees across Africa. I grew up in California. My accent might be a hint about that. However, I immigrated to Africa 30 years ago, and I'm to South Africa 30 years ago, where I am today. And I've had the great privilege of traveling to 34 of Africa's 54 countries. I'm also a founder member of Catalyst 2030, which started around a year ago as a series of conversations on a Schwab Foundation WhatsApp group. So I'm also a member of the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship. And when I first saw these conversations taking place, I must admit that I was pretty skeptical. My experience over the previous 2 decades of working with social entrepreneurs is that they were far more competitive than they were collaborative with each other. But I am delighted to say that this has not been my experience with Catalyst. As a matter of fact, it's been quite the opposite. Some of you will be new to Catalyst, so I'd like to tell you a little bit more about it. It was formally launched at the World Economic Forum in January as a global movement of social entrepreneurs, initially from Ashoka Echoing Green, the Schwab Foundation, and the Skoll Foundation networks, along with funders and other social change innovators, on the belief that collective and bold action and new strategies are needed to achieve the SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals, by 2030. Pre-COVID, it was estimated that it would take till 2094 to achieve most of the goals. And now with COVID, who knows, it's probably sometime in the next millennium. So back in February, just prior to the COVID-19 escalations, around 80 of us met in Northampton in the UK at the Althorp estate, thanks to the generosity of Karen and Charles Spencer. At Althorp, we set out a strategy and a blueprint to radically transform the systems that underpin the SDGs to work with actors like governments, multilateral, civil society groups, business, and others. The aim is to greatly accelerate the pace of the SDGs and to make lasting and positive change in the lives of billions of people around the planet using systems change approaches. And I think what I've been most impressed about with the Catalyst 2030 group, which is around 200 members, is the spirit of generosity. How people have been generous with their time, their advice, their networks, and their resources as we work collectively on problems and issues, and not in silos as we may have done in the past. Catalyst 2030 recommendations will be going into documents that will be presented to the highest levels at the UN, to multi and bilateral organizations, to development banks, to major funders, and other global decision makers. And we're hoping that some of our discussion today can also feed into that document. And one of the key and essential groups to achieving the SDGs are women entrepreneurs. Julius, can I ask you to put up the first slide, please? So, thank you. Specifically, in sub-Saharan Africa, and probably fueled by necessity, women are twice as likely to become entrepreneurs than anywhere else in the world. And that holds true whether she's selling products by the side of the road or becoming a top chef and opening a chain of health restaurants. And she's likely to have more than one enterprise. On the surface, it might seem like women's entrepreneurship is in SDG 5, which is women's equality. But women's entrepreneurs actually touch or impact all 17 goals, whether it's in agriculture by growing tea, processing it and selling it as a premium product around the world, establishing a biotech, a construction or an aviation company, major fashion brands, fishing fleets. She's providing employment, she's putting back into her community, she's building job skills and capacities, she's paying it forward, and she's a role model. There's a huge social dimension to women's entrepreneurship in Africa as well, which makes me think the line between entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs is blurred. It's not the same as you'd find in Europe or in the West, if you say. I would say that in Africa and probably in areas that are under-resourced, women entrepreneurs are also social entrepreneurs. So when you look at all 17 goals, you can see that women touch every single one of these. So I decided, just for fun, the next slide, please, Julius, that I would look up on Google Images what it said of African women's entrepreneurship. Well, that's kind of interesting because for the most part, they're showing up as petty traders. They're likely to be doing something outdoors, selling produce or making produce. And then the next slide, I looked up African entrepreneur as opposed to African women entrepreneur, and guess what? There's not a banana or a tomato in sight. So it really got me thinking that there's probably an image issue here. And that it's not just things like access to capital. It's a whole lot of other issues that we need to think about. Like if you look just at something like venture capital, 2.8 goes to women globally and 0.1% to Black women. 90% of venture capital that goes into East Africa goes to white men. So those are pretty significant statistics. Okay, thank you on that. And today we are very lucky to have 4 exceptional women entrepreneurs on our, I don't like to say panel, but with us today, and let me introduce them now. Not only are they incredible entrepreneurs themselves, but they're affiliated with vast networks of women entrepreneurs. We have Bayo Adelaja. She's the founder and CEO of Do It Now Now, which she established in 2016 in response to the gaps in support available to Black innovators building tech companies and social enterprises in the UK and across Africa. The initiatives Bayo developed have led to awards by both Harvard and Oxford University's business schools for her work to create and foster opportunities for underserved communities through technology. 3 of her initiatives, which are designed to support underrepresented people in tech, were named top in Europe by the Financial Times-backed digital news platform Sifted. And today she's speaking to you from London. Dr. Linda Davis is the founder and CEO of Giraffe Bioenergy, which was established to develop local production of clean, safe, and affordable cooking fuel in Kenya. She has over 15 years extensive experience in senior level positions within the renewable energy sector, including solar systems and cellulosic ethanol technologies, hello, that's kind of left me behind, and algae-based biofuels. Linda has an undergraduate degree in food science and technology at Kenyatta University in Kenya and a PhD in microbiology and biotechnology from the University of Western Sydney, and holds certificates in petroleum refining, project management, finance, and accounting from Stanford. And I met Linda when she headed W Power in Nairobi, a partnership to promote women's entrepreneurship in the clean energy space to address climate change, which was USAID funded, and Linda is joining from Nairobi. Fatou Jobe describes herself as a Senegambian, and she was born in the Gambia with Senegalese and Mauritanian origins. Fatou trained as an architect from the renowned Mackintosh School of Architecture at the Glasgow School of Art. Using her background in architecture and design, Fatou found a need for modernizing the traditional Senegalese baskets, which you can see behind her. And they're absolutely beautiful, and to demonstrate that Africa can produce top quality, high-end products and bring them to new markets across Europe and elsewhere. Some of you may know Melanie Hawkins. She's the founder and CEO of Lionesses of Africa Public Benefit Corporation, which was launched in 2014. It is a super fast-growing, impact-driven social enterprise with a network of, hold your horses, 1 million women entrepreneurs from across Africa and the diaspora. She's harnessing this collective energy, resourcefulness, and innovation to build entrepreneur development programs, network, and resources, all the while rapidly scaling them to support startup women's enterprises on the continent and free of charge. Melanie's on a mission to drive large-scale change for African women entrepreneurs, as we all know, who are the most underserved on the planet. So it's a very, very impressive panel. And I'm going to ask Bio if she will kick it off and share her entrepreneurial journey with us, and also what issues and or SDGs, can't say that too quickly, she's addressing. Thanks, Bio.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad I have the opportunity to be here and speak with all of you about the work that we've been doing over the past 4 years, or coming up 5 years, I suppose, this year. Well, essentially, when I started thinking about what I wanted to do with my life as a young person, I just knew that I wanted to make a difference in the world, and I wanted to make the world a better place. So a positive difference, a markedly positive difference. And having become an immigrant to the UK when I was 10, out of obviously being 10, no decision of my own, I experienced things that were based on people's assumptions about what being a Nigerian was, from Nigerian prince scandals to corruption, Africans being stereotypically, apparently, quite dumb, or having lions as pets, or living in mud huts. Things that just made me think, why doesn't anyone outside of Africa understand the Africa that I know and appreciate the Africa that I know, and then the home that I grew up in? And ruminating on that for a few years, as well as having my own startup experience and professional experience as a social policy researcher, working primarily with the UK government and large charities in the UK, I decided that I wanted to do something that would ensure that a specific space that could affect lots of other areas within African development, could be bridged. A gap could be closed, and I settled on working on. Apparently, someone can't hear me. Is this better, Swati? Okay. I settled on working on African tech primarily, and then similarly working on social entrepreneurship, because it is truly my belief, and the foundation of our organization, that the people that have the best ideas to solve the problems that are plaguing our entire society are the people with so much of a burden to live day to day that they don't have the resources or the tools to be able to bring those ideas and innovation to life. So one of the taglines that we use quite often is, "The future needs us all." And I really do think it's our obligation, based on the privilege that we've had as a team, most of us being diasporans ourselves, to be able to contribute to the development of Africa through the fostering of entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, and the provision of real tools and services that will ensure that African entrepreneurs can move forward in the best way possible. From that preamble, you will probably have guessed that we work on goal 4, which is quality education, and goal 8, which is decent work. And another thing, goal 8. So we work on those two, but we also have a very specific value on women. So we specifically try to make sure that our opportunities are being marketed directly to women. And we also do our best to make sure that locally educated founders within the tech space are getting as much support as possible. As Christine said, 90% of the funding in the African tech space goes to in East Africa went to white men, and the statistics are not much better across the rest of Africa. So we're trying to ensure that local people can also build tech solutions that will scale across their countries and perhaps even across the entire continent. Thank you. Oh, Christine, you're on mute.
I muted myself. Thank you, Linda.
Thanks, Christine. Thanks, Catalyst, for this great opportunity. I'm just going to tell 2 short stories that hopefully summarize my journey to entrepreneurship thus far. The first one is like most Kenyans, urban Kenyans like myself, I grew up primarily in the city, in a house with running water and everything that you might find in the West. But during the school holidays, my mom was careful to send us to the village so we can interact with cousins and grandmothers and aunties. And I remember just 2 distinct things, right, as a child. One is collecting firewood, and 2 is collecting water, and 3, having to finish all our chores before dark, because there was going to be inconveniences in finishing our chores. So those 3 things have stuck with me quite strongly. So secondly, once I finished my undergraduate and went to Australia, my very first job as a junior consultant at PricewaterhouseCoopers, I was careful to send money back to my village to at least set some electricity. Of all the 3 inconveniences, electricity, water, and cooking with firewood, that really struck me, because I couldn't read. The days are limited, you're working so hard during the day, and yet I loved my novels and things like that. So the first thing I did was send money over to my village to get electricity. I'll spare you the details of how many times I did that, because inevitably it would be used for something more of an emergency, a sick child, a sick auntie, this, that, and the other. So finally I had to do it all by myself from Australia, and we had that electricity. I was able to bring water right in front of the village, piped water. But the third thing I wasn't able to solve, or in my mind, was cooking, right? Still cooked with charcoal, still cooked with firewood. Fast forward, I work in the ethanol industry in the US, where ethanol is used as a fuel extender. 10% of every gallon of petrol is blended with ethanol. So I worked in a tech environment, in a science biotechnology company, and my clients, insofar as I lived in San Diego, were all in the Midwest. And a little bit of a description about the Midwest: it's not typically known as a diverse community. I worked in the ethanol industry, which was primarily very tall, strong men who work in the factory. And I'm just going to finish this by saying 2 things. I had to work, obviously, like everybody else, extra hard to even be noticed. And if you were noticed, it's probably not for the right reasons. So it got to a point I was exhausted about walking into a factory, an ethanol factory, with my hard hat, with my boots, and I'm ready to solve a problem, because my tech team, my sales team were unable to solve a problem. That's when they would call me out as the big boss from San Diego. And I would do my work. I'd walk into the room, and one particular incident just stood out to me above all others. Meeting starts at 9. Of course, we're there 8:45. The room fills up with all the tech people that are coming in, and the plant manager comes, and the chit chat continued until maybe about 9:20. And then suddenly, in frustration, the plant manager says, "Where's Dr. Davis? You know, we've got a plant to run. She's late. I mean, he's late." Right? So it was just assumed that I was, I don't know, a prop, or I certainly couldn't be the person who is supposed to do a technical job in this kind of environment. Finally, how did I come back to Kenya? Same scenario, really big meeting, the Renewable Fuel Association meeting, big group of people. I was the only Black person, male or female. Then suddenly on screen, they showed pictures of impoverished Black women cooking with charcoal and firewood. And I had, in my mind, forgotten, I think, about that issue until everyone rubbernecks and says, "Oh, we know Linda from who's the only Black member of the RFA." So as soon as there was a coffee break, everyone comes to me and says, "We didn't know there's this problem," right? We had no idea about this problem. And guess what? Neither did I. I did not know the size of the problem. I did not fully appreciate just how much of a burden it is for women to cook in Africa, for women to cook in Kenya. I thought about the memories of me growing up. And I have to say, in that room, I was very, very embarrassed. And that was in 2014. 2015, a 40-foot container rolled around, moved my entire family to Kenya. Thought, okay, I never want to feel like that again, where a room full of people who do not have firsthand experience were being asked to solve a problem that I felt that I should have been part of the solution. So finally, that brought me to the Partnership on Women's Entrepreneurship in Renewables. That's an organization where I met Christine. And the role there was to encourage and support women entrepreneurs across the global south, in Africa and in India and in Nepal as well. The organization had about 45 members, and the members were organizations that recognized the central role that women must play in clean energy entrepreneurship. And we were looking at solar systems and cook stoves as well. So that was a very, very satisfying job for about 2.5 years until the priorities of the US administration changed, along with the leadership change that happened in 2016. So very quickly that priority was no longer a priority. So I thought, okay, that's it. I spent 2.5 years understanding, quote unquote, the plight of women entrepreneurs. I understand the issues I felt I did firsthand, lack of access to financing, just the struggle. I thought, that's it. Instead of now looking for another job, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. And that's what brought me to found my organization, Giraffe Bioenergy. And we're really looking at success as being a large ethanol plant that produces ethanol specifically for cooking. Our substrate is cassava. So we will have about 15,000 hectares under cassava, and that cassava will be processed in a state-of-the-art biorefinery, and that fuel will be consumed by urban women. So in a nutshell, we're going to have rural development by having a large-scale commercial farming, primarily by women-headed household, and then we will have a biorefinery in the rural areas, and then we will distribute our product in the urban market. I'll stop there. I'm happy to talk more about where we're at, but thank you again for being part of this panel.
Thank you, Linda. And Fatu, can I ask you to go ahead? I think you're still muted.
Hello, hi. So yeah, I just wanted to say that I trained as an architect and I moved to Senegal to work in an architectural practice. I studied in Scotland, and when I moved back to Senegal, I had imagined that I would be able to work on restoration of old buildings that were existing on the island of Gorée and also in Saint Louis. But when I got to Senegal, I realized that there was not much interest and funding available for restoration of old buildings. Architects here were more interested in pulling down anything that was old and then putting up very modern towers, and this wasn't what I was interested in. But having lived out of Africa for many years, I wanted to stay here. And so I worked for an architectural practice whereby I was actually pulling down old buildings to put up modern buildings, but this was soul destroying work. At the same time, I was decorating my house, and I had an interest in this traditional baskets. So I began experimenting, asking for neutral colors, because the baskets here locally are very colorful, and they haven't really changed over the years. Since I was a child, since I was a girl, you know, I would see the similar baskets growing up, and the baskets have always had the same shape and style, which is for sorting out rice, for grain storage. But then in the modern homes, people would normally just buy rice, locally grown rice, in a sachet, which was already cleaned and washed. So nobody had the use anymore for the flat layu, as we call them, the flat baskets. But it could be used for decoration for the walls. And then I didn't see any neutral colors for the baskets, only the colorful ones. So I began to ask the weavers whether they were able to make just a neutral basket, a white basket. And they couldn't even imagine just having a white basket with no color, or just one color, like a black basket with nothing else added. And it's like, who would want this kind of basket? And I was like, well, I'm interested if you're able to make them for me, for my house. And so it started off like that. And I have a friend, Wendy, who asked for a yoga mat holder. And so we made that for her, and she was sharing it on Facebook, and then people were asking, oh wow, I've not seen a white basket in Senegal, can we order one? But I was still working in an architectural practice, but I was doing work which I love architecture, but I just imagined my future as working in restoration of old buildings. And I had approached UNESCO in Senegal, but there wasn't anything that was available for restoration. And so, yeah, then I moved towards the baskets, but the more involved I became with the women weavers, initially it was just for my own use. It wasn't for sale. It wasn't for sale initially. It was just for my own use, for my own decoration, and then for my friend, the yoga mat as a gift, the yoga mat holder as a gift. But then I realized with the women that they were in a rural Senegal, and they didn't really have access to markets in Dakar or to be able to export. There were already existing companies that exported the Senegal baskets to Europe and to the States, but all of them were owned by either foreigners, and they would have the local people as the middlemen, the local men, all of them men, and then the women were the weavers. And so you have these middlemen who were really squeezing the women. And the more I talked to the women, the more I heard their stories, it weighed on me quite heavily, actually, the fact that here I could make a difference, but then on the other hand, I studied as an architect. I had spent over 7 years studying, and this was my profession. And so it took a lot of soul searching to decide how to move ahead. And what I think the change happened in 2017-18 when I went on holiday to see a friend in Vietnam. My friend and I had 5 days of holiday. Then on the last 3 days of my trip, she had to go back to work. So I wanted to look at Vietnamese artisanal, like artisanal baskets from Vietnam. As I looked online and as I searched for Vietnam articrafts and handicrafts, Senegal baskets kept coming up. So I asked them, I contacted one of them, and I asked them, is it possible to visit your factory or your workplace? And they were a bit skeptical, like, why would you want to visit? And I said, well, I'm not in a basket business. I just want to understand why Senegal baskets kept coming up in my search. And so I met 3 factories out of 8, and I met the person who started the Senegal baskets in Vietnam, and he showed me the model, the prototype from Senegal, and he's told me we're the biggest exporter of Senegal baskets. I said, but it's made in Senegal. I said, yes, the original, yes, but we actually use water hyacinth to make these baskets. So I came back and I had a meeting with the women, and I said, I'm willing to try this out for a year or two to see where it could take us. I'm willing to take the risk and buy baskets and help to find markets for it. So we did this. I would do the designs and then we would make the baskets. So I contacted different companies in Scandinavia, in Sweden, Denmark, Norway, to see if they would be interested in stocking these baskets. And the response was overwhelming. And we had an order from Sweden, and they had very specific size requirements. And so it was a shallow bowl, 35 centimeter opening, a smaller one, 25 centimeter opening. And so I said to the women, okay, we have an order, off we go. Here's the tape measure, here's the drawing, here's the tape measure. So I had 10 women at the beginning, and they all had their tape measure and a drawing, very naively. And we had all sorts of sizes when the first batch came back. We had like 45 centimeter, 50 centimeter, and I was very shocked and surprised and asked, but you saw the drawings, you saw the measurements. Said, yes, you gave us this paper with the drawing, this is what we did, but you wrote something, but we don't know what it was. And the tape measure, they didn't even know how to use the tape measure. But I was very naive. I had, trained as an architect, based all my life in measurements. And I just couldn't even imagine. Of course, you hear about somebody that they never went to school or they're not educated, but to see it face to face was shocking. And so for that first order, we had to cut up sticks as measuring for the baskets. But then I said to the women, I don't have time for every design to cut up sticks. If you want to work with me, then you'll have to do a literacy program. Even if the basics, I don't need, not to write a book, but just to have the basics of measuring, writing your name, how many baskets you've done. So that launched our literacy program for the women in the villages. And it's passionate work, because the more involved you get with the work with the women and with the work that we're doing, like showing them the color wheel and showing what colors could work for the European markets or for other African countries for export and for the local market, and targeting each market accordingly with the different colors. Then, yeah, and so the more involved I got with the women, the more I realized that there was a need for this kind of support. But also the women had some horrible stories, some of them, there was one, Nogoy, she's wonderful, she's amazing. She's just inspires me so much. She was able to leave a very violent marriage, which had suffered in silence for 15 years. And just because she didn't have choices, without money, you don't have any choices. And I think this is the kind of work that is motivating me more and more. And up to date now, we have 183 people that we work with, and there's need to work with more. We can potentially work with 2,000 women, like in Vietnam, but we're not up to that scale yet. So yeah, just to say that it's passionate work, and you can see, for the SDGs, for the poverty reduction, for education, because we're also sponsoring their children, and we're also encouraging them not to keep their girls at home, but also to send them to school, because some of the girls would have left school around age 10 or 12, and then they would have been married off by age 14. And they would do this all under secrecy but now, of course, more and more of these girls are getting the education that they need. And then their mothers and their aunties and their grandmothers are also able to work with us.
Wonderful. That's a wonderful story, and not an uncommon one in Africa, that you start off with an idea of one thing, you end up going down a different path, and then the impact that you make just keeps going and going and going, because each one of those women has children, has grandchildren, they're all benefiting.
Yes, so and for them also to learn about setting goals. For example, I didn't want, of course, my company is still a small startup, we don't have any funds at all. And so it's the idea is that, okay, I'm not the one who's coming to your village to change things. It's you who will be the changing. So for example, you want a solar fridge? Okay, I'm willing to fund it, but that means that you have to put money aside to pay. So I'm able to put the deposit for the solar fridge or for the solar electricity, because most of these villages don't have electricity or running water. More and more, they have running water, but electricity is still lacking. And so with the solar power, they are contributing. And because they're contributing, you can't even measure the dignity that affords them to say that we funded these lightings and we funded this fridge.
That's great. Thank you. Melanie, can I turn over to you?
Sure, thank you. Such a pleasure to be part of this event this afternoon and to meet you all. And so good to sort of be with my fellow women entrepreneur powerhouses on this panel. I have to say, I feel quite in awe of everything that you have done and the contributions you've made to the continent. I'm constantly inspired by my fellow women entrepreneurs. I think together we're a force to be reckoned with. So just to give you a little bit of background, I have been I've called Africa home for the last 17 plus years. I'm originally from England, although I haven't actually lived in England for a very long number of years. I am a social entrepreneur today, but I've actually been an entrepreneur for over 35 years, running my own businesses globally in the field of media, communications, publishing. And when I first moved to South Africa, and again called it home, I really wanted to be able to make a difference, not just in terms of the businesses that I was creating and the products and services that I was creating on the ground and people I was employing. I wanted to be able to do something that had a lasting impact, because the one thing I really came to realize quickly, living and working in Africa, was that it's tough for women entrepreneurs. Let's face it, it's tough for women entrepreneurs anywhere in the world. And you can only see the statistics and the research indicates it's just tough, full stop. I think going into Africa, there are other key challenges that you have to face being a woman entrepreneur. So the normal challenges you face in terms of getting access to markets or access to finance or access to skills development, all of those things becomes even greater when you are in Africa and trying to run a business and start a business. So for me, being an entrepreneur and wanting to do something that could make a difference to my fellow women entrepreneurs, it was really all about understanding the power of community, understanding what happens if you bring together enough women entrepreneurs in one part of the world to say, if we're going to change things for ourselves, let's actually see how we can do it as a force to be reckoned with together, as really understanding power of community. And so for me, when I looked to launch Lionesses of Africa, I really wanted to bring together enough women entrepreneurs to be able to say, okay, what's not working here? Why are we not getting access to the right kind of markets, the right kind of business opportunities, the right kind of development or the right kind of finance when we're looking to grow? How do we solve that? We can't look to other people to do. We've actually got to look to ourselves and say, how do we do this and make our voices heard to be able to effect change ourselves, understanding what the problems are and the dynamics are on the ground. And instead of having other people sort of helicopter in and say, we think this is what you need or want, actually being able to say, look, we know what we need and want. We know what's not working here. We know what we need to change. Work with us to actually do that. So that is how the idea for Lioness of Africa came about. It was, how do we galvanize a movement of incredible women entrepreneurs that are all wanting to fulfill their potential to be able to build successful companies, launch products, services, brands, things that can make a real difference to country, community, continent, but really get them access to markets, access to finance, access to development and training when they need it, access to the right resources, the right advice and information to be able to grow and fulfill that potential. But importantly, to actually get visibility. Because the one thing I noticed, when I first moved to the African continent, I met the most incredible women entrepreneurs in my various networks each and every day. And I was blown away by what women were doing. And yet, when I was sitting in other African countries, or I was sitting in London or New York or Paris or wherever it happened to be, I used to say to people, have you heard about this incredible company, this incredible woman entrepreneur I've met? Have you seen this product? It is absolutely world class. Why is it not sitting on your shelves? Why is it not actually being sold here? Why are you not using this service? This is world class. And people would say, wow, never heard of them. Never knew that kind of thing existed on the African continent. Where do we find these women entrepreneurs? Where do we hear about them? And really, the idea behind Lioness of Africa was, how do we then create a community where we can give visibility to women entrepreneurs that are doing incredible things in every sector, in every country of all sizes, scales, and dimensions. How do we give them visibility? How do we give them a voice? How do we connect them with people who can actually do business with them, or open up markets, or open up financial opportunities? Whatever it happens to be, how do we galvanize ourselves as a group of women entrepreneurs to be the change that we want to see, so that we can actually fulfill our potential across the continent? And that's how it started. It started with a group, ironically, it started with a group of women who were getting together to talk about the challenges and the problems and how we fix it, and actually saying, okay, and the challenge was very much put down in front of me. Okay, Melanie, you want to change something? You want to see change happening? Well, start it yourself. Do something yourself. What are you going to do? And Lioness of Africa community came together as a group of women entrepreneurs across a number of countries. It started with 10. We're now in 54 African countries. We have over 1 million women entrepreneurs in our network. And we're now growing at the rate of 30,000 plus women entrepreneurs joining us every month. So we've become this community to be reckoned with. And now the challenge is, how do we really get the world to sit up and take notice, to actually sit up and make government take notice, companies, big businesses, procurement specialists to say, listen, we're creating world-class products, services, we're there, do business with us. And as a result of which, Africa will grow, it will thrive, because when you do business with women entrepreneurs, the value chain is so much longer. Women give back to community, they give back to education, they give back to training and development of others, they give back to greater society as a whole. So the value chain is longer. So to me, it's a no-brainer. You know, if we get 1 million women plus entrepreneurs together from the African continent, and we know the power of all of those connectivity, all of that connectivity that they make through their own businesses and through their own lives and through their own families and communities, we can try and make big change happen on the continent. And for me, that's the galvanizing impact of bringing 1 million plus women together. Over to you.
Wow, thank you, Melanie. When I met Melanie, and I think you said it was something like, and we have 50,000 women in our network, I was rather blown away and astonished by that. So you can imagine in about 4 years how this has, how I've seen it grow and expand, and it really is incredible and a very uniting force. I think in the time that we are living in now, it's really important to understand, and the stories that we don't always hear are around how COVID-19 is actually impacting women on the ground. So if I can ask our panelists to talk about the impact that COVID is having on them, the work they're trying to do, and the problems that they're trying to solve. Bio, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, absolutely. So in terms of COVID, I think what has been really interesting, well, it was interesting that the entire world shut down and has tried to reckon with itself and understand where the problems are and why this was the thing that shut us down, as opposed to a number of other things that could have in the past. But for us as a business that seeks to support people on the African continent, with the privilege of being registered in the UK and then having all of these corporate backers that we have worked with over the past few years and grant funders that we've worked with over the past few years, the thing that's kind of struck as disheartening in this climate is that supporting entrepreneurship is no longer, is at least in this climate, not seen as an important thing to be doing. It's kind of being put on the back burner at the moment. And I do understand the reasoning being that COVID is obviously a very important thing that everyone is experiencing. And when you are experiencing something, particularly when you have the power to make decisions as to what is important and what is not, the thing that you're experiencing and have a personal connection to is obviously much more pressing and much more important. So COVID-19 is the story, as opposed to hunger or any of the other things that we've been facing as a world for all of these years. I don't mean to sound ungrateful for the level of giving that is happening at the moment, or the donations and things, but I do fear that we may see because of the level of depth that and the level of instability or the level of desperation to survive that Black entrepreneurs typically experience around as a racial group of entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs around the world, I do fear that the lack of support for entrepreneurship, like normal, regular entrepreneurship, particularly across the continent, will see the end of normal entrepreneurs, that because people are finding it very difficult to pivot into what this world looks like now. Our own organization, thankfully, is it because of where we're based, we have the opportunity to rely on a steady internet connection and a steady electricity, so that we can essentially do a lot of things based on just our skill set and not necessarily have to worry about a number of other things. But I fear that we're going to see a lot of businesses have to close their doors, and particularly in Africa, where so many businesses that do start are solving a real lived experience-based problem. The closure of those businesses will automatically deeply impact the health, wellness, and life satisfaction of all of the beneficiaries, not just the primary beneficiaries, but the secondary and tertiary beneficiaries as well. I am deeply worried about the impact of COVID as a life world altering experience, because it has forced everyone's attention and therefore made everything else unimportant by comparison. And that isn't obviously to negate the impact of COVID, because it is a real thing, but I wish we could think of 2 or more things at the same time and continue supporting those that need it. That was me.
Thank you very much, and very, very thoughtful. Who else would like to share with us the impact that this time has had on you?
Oh, if I can do, oh, sorry. Fatu, after you. No, after you.
I was going to say for me, and for Imadi, we work mostly with the rural community, and there it's been quite devastating in the sense that the markets were closed. They're not able to stay at home. So here in Dakar, in the city, when you say stay at home, you're able to stock up your fridge, you're able to go to the supermarket. There, with the markets that were closed, it was very difficult for the weavers. And what we've been actually doing since the beginning of March, I think first week of March, every week we've been sending food supplies to the villages and to keep them going, because actually people are more scared of hunger than COVID, to be honest, just because they have no source, no way to feed themselves and their families, even though they might have salaries, but then they might be working with the baskets, and they might have been putting money aside bit by bit. But if their husbands also stop working, because some of the weavers, their husbands are in Dakar, in this capital city, where they work as building masons or taxi drivers or garbage collectors, for example. And then with the COVID, most of the building construction sites had stopped. People were not going out as much, so less work for taxi drivers. So they didn't have the income also from their husbands. So we have been actually sending food every week, and I think to date we've supported about 193 households every week, and each household maybe has about 20 people, and this is the extended family. So you have the weaver with her children, her mother, her auntie. So the impact of COVID has been more of the food security crisis from our point of view. Most of our clients have actually seen an increase in home decoration. So for example, the baskets, our clients in the US and in France have seen that because people are staying at home and people have more time to redecorate their spaces, there's been an increase in the demand for home decoration items on their websites. We have a client, she's in Congo, and she had said to me that she'll be back in Dakar in December to place a second order. She did a first small order in January, just before everything happened. And we had a call this morning. She doesn't have a single basket left just because people have been contacting her on WhatsApp and they're stuck at home. They want to redesign their spaces. So it's sort of mixed feelings, I guess. On one hand, our clients are selling out, but then we are more focused right now in helping the weavers get through day to day.
Yeah. If I can just sort of share some experiences from the Lionesses Network, because obviously we have over 1 million women that are feeding back on an hourly basis what's going on in their spaces and the impacts around COVID on their lives and their businesses. And it really is, it really is a shared concern and a shared challenge for pretty much everybody across the network. I think that the deciding thing is those that can pivot are the ones that are likely to be able to make it in the shorter term, that are finding ways of being able to harness the power of digital to make that pivot happen. The ones that are reliant on a particular industry sector are experiencing vast amounts of pain, and some of those will in all likelihood simply not be able to recover because the sectors won't. And I'll give you a very classic example. I was talking to a woman entrepreneur just in the last 24 hours who is absolutely reliant on the tourism sector in South Africa. And as you know, at the moment, for the last few months, the tourism sector has had to shut down in its entirety in South Africa. No one coming in, no one going out, no one actually able to do anything in the tourism sector. This particular woman entrepreneur employs 170 people, all women, all head of household, all responsible for an average between 10 and 12 people. So all of a sudden you have someone who has had a very buoyant business, but the problem being with one major client, and that being government and in the tourism sector. And as soon as you have what was actually on face of it, looking at it, a very successful business, employing a lot of people, creating great product in a very buoyant industry sector, overnight, that sector closes down. Government closes down in terms of the buying capacity that it has. It can't forward buy. It's already, it's already dealing with issues bigger than you. And all of a sudden, you have a business that is on the face of it looking non-viable in the short term. How does a business like that pivot? It's very tough when you are reliant on a particular sector. That is one flip side. On the other side, I've also been speaking to women entrepreneurs who on the face of it should have also had really huge challenges and decimated businesses. So I look at the fashion business, the fashion industry, which under normal circumstances is very buoyant for women entrepreneurs in Africa. There are some amazing women building really significant businesses and brands and employing a lot of people in their industry sectors. And that's a really important sector, manufacturing, and particularly garment manufacturing on the African continent. It's an important sector. But these women entrepreneurs, because they were perhaps in the high end of the business or they were in mainstream manufacturing for retail, retail shuts down, retail stops buying, your luxury end of the market stops buying. Basically, your market dries up overnight. What do you do next? So where I've seen amazing women pivot is we've had luxury fashion brand manufacturers actually going into manufacturing hospital scrubs en masse and reworking their factories to keep all the machinists going, to keep their packers going, their delivery people going, and actually turning those skills into a needed commodity. I've seen it with gin distilleries at the high end of the market, normally employing large numbers of people, actually then turning their distilleries into the creation of hand sanitizers in bulk for industrial and residential use. So in some instances, there are businesses that are being able to say, okay, let's turn a crisis into a potential opportunity and go out there and look for those opportunities. In other sectors, the choice is simply not there. Pivoting is not an option because the sectors are just disappearing as a result of the impact. So it is going to be a tale of two very different responses and choice being taken away from some women entrepreneurs, and others who are going to rise to the challenge and maybe survive. And that's the case anywhere in the world, I'm sure.
Thank you, Melanie. Very interesting. Linda.
Linda here. Just some quick comments. First, to say I agree with all the comments that have been made, and I particularly appreciate the contrasting stories. So just very briefly, for my organization, I fall maybe somewhere in between. And just for some context, I had secured large grant funding, hundreds and thousands of dollars, which my single source of funding at that point said, oh, now we're going to wait and see, right? So we don't know when the situation turns. We'll reach back to you when the COVID situation has gone away. And then I was starting this cascade of bringing in the additional funding to start on this very important work of growing the cassava and everything else. So overnight, or seemingly to me, I lost hundreds of thousands of dollars, which took about a year of pitching, a year of developing the concept of dreaming and networking and doing all this work to just go away. So I just want to echo Bayo's point. You know, the problems that we were trying to solve have not gone away because we have this acute problem, right? The issue of lack of clean cooking impacts women's lungs because they're the ones that are overrepresented in the kitchen, women and children, right? So COVID will, and I knock on wood, so far the numbers in Africa, don't compare as much as those in other countries, even though my heart goes out to them. It's definitely a terrible health pandemic globally. But when you look at some of the underlying issues, right? The WHO says cooking for 1 hour in a smoky kitchen is the equivalent of smoking 4 packets of cigarettes a day. These are things women and children are doing every day. So my deep concern was, if we stop looking for these solutions, right, then the initial problem has not gone away. 85% of Kenyans cook in this manner. 75% of Africans cook in this manner, mainly women and children, right? So we have to keep our eyes on all the different global problems, right? Not just the one that is currently painful. So
yeah.
Always hard to remember to unmute before you talk. Thank you all very much. I mean, all of you have been impacted by this, and I think, you said the word pivot. To me, that I think is going to be something that will come to the fore. I was just thinking of, there was a time when nobody thought that Nigeria would ever sort of shake off its dependence on oil exports. But with them slowly declining over the last few years, Nigerians have really diversified and gone into all sorts of things. You think of Rwanda 25, 26 years ago, who could have ever imagined that it would be a tourism hub that attracts high-end tourism like it does now? Will that be able to continue? I don't know, but I feel like I have faith in the ability of Africans to pivot again and find something else. China has been saying for some years now it wants to get out of lower end manufacturing, and it's looking to Ethiopia largely and a couple of other African countries to do that. And how will that leave Ethiopia poised in the future? I think also with the going local, that this is going to be an incredible opportunity, in particular for women entrepreneurs, to pivot into new businesses on local. I mean, if you look at the numbers of how much Africa exports versus trades with each other, the numbers are not to my head at the moment, but they're really high. So it's very hard when we're faced with such incredible day-to-day issues to think of, what else to do now, because so many people are just absolutely devastated. So I want to open it up to the audience to ask questions. You're welcome to either unmute to ask them to somebody or to put them in the chat. Do we have any coming through? If you talk more quickly than you type, then by all means, unmute yourself. Or do you all have questions for each other?
Christine, if I can ask your panel, how do they believe that we can encourage and give more confidence to more women to start their own organizations? I know so much of it is about funding, but I feel the voice of African women living in Africa is seldom heard in the philanthropic or funding circles. And I just wonder how your panel feel that we can encourage women from relatively poor settings to become entrepreneurs. Is that an unrealistic goal?
Okay, can I maybe, oh, sorry, Linda, did you want to, Linda, you were first, go.
I just wanted to very, very quickly say, you know, one of the things that we could do better is perhaps highlight the work of Melanie and what she's trying to do in one platform, right? Because to encourage others, you know, the issue of role models, right? The highlighting good examples is very, very key. Yeah. There's got to be a reason why financing accrues primarily to a certain type of person, maybe a white male. There are new.
Did we just lose Linda?
I think we may have.
Yeah, it looks like we've lost her.
Can I maybe pick up where I was going to come in? And actually, Linda said exactly what I was going to say. Oh, Linda, you're back. Do you want to finish what you were saying? We just lost you for a moment.
You're on mute.
Oh, the joys of Zoom. Just to repeat, like some of the work that you're doing, highlighting role models, panels like this where we can share journeys could go some ways in helping encourage others to become entrepreneurs.
Thank Linda, you took the words out of my mouth. That was exactly what I was about to say, role models. Role models are key. One thing we've really found, and Andrea, you mentioned, your question was very much, how do we maybe encourage women, maybe young women who've not considered, because of the backgrounds they come from, the communities they've come from, where maybe there are no entrepreneurs that they know that are successful. And that's a really big challenge on the African continent. It's a very big, daunting thing. If you're a young person, if you are a woman at home with responsibilities, it's a very big thing to say, okay, well, you can improve your life if you start a business. What can you do? Go out and maybe start a business, take that leap. If you don't have any role models in your family or in your community of women entrepreneurs that are doing it and can say to you, well, this is how I dealt with this particular challenge. This is how I was able to produce a product or a service that people wanted to buy. This is how, at a practical level, this is how I manage a business and also run a family so that I'm maintaining my responsibilities at home, because that's a really big deal. Unless you actually have those role models around you, it's pretty much impossible to think that you could be that. You know, and that's a really big, that's one of the big pieces of feedback we get from our community every single day. What we're finding, though, interestingly, there is a new generation of young women in Africa that are digitally savvy, and that seems to be the difference. If you have access to technology, if you have access to internet, if you have access to information, you also have access to opportunities to be able to improve your your life, your aspirations, your access to information so that you can learn and you can take an idea and maybe research what else has happened in the world, who's done it. Also within your networks, if you are a young person and you are connected digitally to a wider community through your school, through your community, through the wider environment you live in, the chances are, again, you are likely to have aspirations that could be realized because it makes it all the more possible. It's very hard to do that if you're in a rural community where you don't know anyone in your family or your community that's ever been an entrepreneur successfully. So role models are absolutely key. The other thing we find through Lionesses and through all of the stories that we share, it's about visibility. And this is actually a key thing. If you don't actually see and hear the voices of women entrepreneurs from the African continent that are doing whatever it is, doing their thing in any sector or building a business of any size, whether you are a startup, whether you are a successful big business, women do not have a big enough voice. And therefore, again, your access to inspiration, your access to, again, being able to see role models who've been there and done it, is really limited. So we have to get greater visibility. We have to get a bigger voice. We have to be, and also I have to be honest, one of the big things we've found over the years through Lionesses, and women entrepreneurs in our network admit this, there's almost a tendency not to shout about what you do because the chances are it was very hard getting to where you got. And sometimes there is a reluctance to go shouting about it because, you know, the perception is, well, yeah, I've made it, but a lot of people I know in my community have not. And therefore not wanting to shout about it, not wanting to perhaps make a big deal about it is also a challenge. So we're having to encourage a whole generation of women to actually talk about, not in a boastful way, but actually share how they've made it, how they got there, how they've made that transition. So that there are a lot of different reasons why a new generation is not perhaps leaping to entrepreneurship as being a solution. And let's be honest about it. It's scary, it's hard, it's difficult, it's tough, and the majority will fail. That's the case for entrepreneurs anywhere in the world, particularly the case in Africa. So it's not an easy choice, it's a hard choice.
Absolutely. Melanie, what I do want to ask you is, can you speak a little bit more about the data and the research that you want to be undertaking with entrepreneurs? Because it's really frustrating when you go to look for research. You'll find that some big global monitoring unit did research on women entrepreneurs, and yet it was only South Africa. Or they skimmed the surface, or they've looked at just access to finance. They haven't looked at the cultural issues. I think that the research that has gone into African entrepreneurship all the way around has been done by largely Westerners without an understanding of the cultural context. They've missed some really critical points. They don't understand that, like in the West, they don't roll up their businesses all into one to have one as big as possible. They want to have lots of little separate ones, as an example. So what kind of research is your unit going to undertake? And what do you hope to do with that research?
This is a really big deal. And this has been a real cause of frustration with me, and I'm sure with every woman entrepreneur that is part of this discussion today, is that big decisions at a purchasing level, at a procurement level, at a government funding level, are actually based on data where I sometimes wonder if a woman entrepreneur has actually been interviewed or asked at all about the challenges they're facing and what they need in their businesses. Because the decisions that are made around funding seem to bear no relation whatsoever to the need on the ground, or the realities, the business realities for women entrepreneurs on the ground. And for me, I'm invited to go and sit in UN meetings, and I'm invited to sit in African Development Bank meetings and various big, a lot of these big influencer meetings around the world. And I always hear about, the challenges and the small percentage of funding that goes to support women entrepreneurs in Africa, and what do we need to do about it? And I sit up there and get really frustrated because, again, I say, well, what are you basing your current decisions on? Why is it? Why are you not asking yourselves why the funding is not going to where it's actually needed? And have you actually bothered to take the time to speak to enough women entrepreneurs about where the challenges are and why it's not happening, and why they're only getting a small percentage of that funding? Surely we need to be part of that conversation in order to be able to inform these decisions. And so part of the reason, apart from being on my part a huge amount of frustration of sitting in meetings like this and just seeing funding decisions that are just astonishing to me and make no sense to me on the ground. Is everyone keeps saying to me, well, provide me with the data to tell me exactly what the challenge is then. If you're telling me that this is wrong and you're telling me that something is, is not happening for women entrepreneurs in your network, where's the data? Tell us why the decisions we're making are actually not based on fact. Give us the data. Show us the scale of the problem here. And so we've, at Lionesses of Africa, given that we have access to this incredible network of women entrepreneurs in every African country and in the diaspora, to be able to say, okay, we are sitting on a potential vast repository of insights, of information, of data that could start to change the narrative, could start to change the thought processes and the decision-making processes of those that are actually looking at putting funding or procurement decisions around women's entrepreneurship in Africa. So we've launched a new research unit as part of Lionesses of Africa. We are working with big business to fund some of this research. And I'll give you a classic example right now of a piece of research that's underway. And this is simply, it's in South Africa, but the reason is we've partnered with a South African financial institution to be able to do that research. But we know it will have an impact on women entrepreneurs in that particular country and will also wake up some minds elsewhere. And it is really coming down to, if you invest in women entrepreneurs in Africa, and particularly with this piece of research in South Africa, and the right kind of funding is put in the hands of potentially high growth women entrepreneurs that have got a potential to employ, are they going to be the drivers of job creation that we have seen in the past, given the right kind of resources? Can they impact on, again, where these jobs are really desperately needed now? In South Africa, on the African continent. They've been the drivers so far, but no one has actually seen them in that respect as economic drivers, given the right kind of support and job creators. But we really now need to drill down and understand to what extent they have been the unseen job creators on the continent, what their potential is to continue to be, excuse me, job creators with the right kind of support and the right kind of investment and the right kind of access to markets, because it's not all about funding, it's about access to markets. And also looking at things like the impact of a phenomenon like COVID has just been on job destruction, and really changing that reality for women entrepreneurs. So unless we've actually got the right kind of data and hard data based on, not just a little straw poll of 500 women that are sat in one particular country. We need to be looking at research right the way across the continent, and our new unit is going to be doing that. Looking at longitudinal studies, not just a little dip-in survey of a particular issue, but actually tracking and monitoring and engaging with women entrepreneurs over 3-5 years, and actually looking at trends emerging, looking at patterns emerging, looking at challenges and how women entrepreneurs are dealing with them, looking at where the gaps are, looking at, is it a matter of just injecting more funding in there, or is the access to markets piece the real challenge, or is it access to skills development and education? Without that research to underpin the discussions with these large institutions, financiers, investors, procurement people, decision makers in corporates, we're never going to get change to happen.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think all of us and many more are going to be very pleased to track that research. I just want to go to Winthrop's question, and I think that he's bio. Oh, there we go. I think this maybe one would be for you. Have you seen women entrepreneurs, in the time that you've been women entrepreneurs, have you seen changes in attitudes towards you as women? Getting better, less lonely, less or more invisible? And sorry, that's my cat screaming in the background. If you can, because I was screaming at her to stop. I said, "Shut up!" And I just thought, I hope I'm on mute. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you for the question, Winthrop. So I personally think that as a person in the actual space, I feel like you end up finding your people eventually, people that will champion you and help you and move you forward. I do think the same challenges that I faced when I first started 4.5 years ago are the very same challenges that entrepreneurs that start today, women entrepreneurs that start today, are facing. Those problems haven't gone away, but my experience of those problems have lessened. as time has gone on, because I've kind of cut my teeth and figured out how to find the right people, how to gauge partnerships quickly, how to know who's using us as a name or a logo, as opposed to wanting to take on the real challenges and really trying to solve a problem with us. So that has been disappointing over the years, honestly. There have been fantastic people like Christine that have been very kind to me, and done their best to open doors for me where they can, but I have to say those people are very few and far between. And I do often feel like the underdog in the room. I often very much feel like because we're in rooms with corporations, with representatives of large corporations, and it's for a long time I felt like I was begging people to see that there was a problem, or at least care about the problem, even a little bit. Just I was thinking about new ways to tell them, to explain the problem to them so that they could understand it and emote and all of those things. And nowadays I recognize that in terms of sustainability in the long run, you have to, for lack of a better term, play the game and like feed into those spaces and try and enter those spaces. But I started recognizing that if we were going, because everything is dependent on your network, your expertise, your experience, your abilities, and everyone's journey is just immeasurably different. So based on what I have and what my team has and the people that I have around me and the access that I have just decided really to focus on what I can do and focus on what not really look at whether or not people are seeing me, but just see who is seeing me and make sure that I'm connecting in the best way possible with those people and doing my best to represent what we're trying to do. And no longer waiting for people to give me permission to do the things that we've wanted to do for a long time. Funnily enough, we are also starting a research center, having come from a research background. That has been a very big part of what I've been wanting to do for a long time, but with the lack of, we're a small organization, lack of funding, and all of those things, it's been difficult to find the person that would focus on that. And we're now at a position where we're starting to move into that direction, focusing on what early stage entrepreneurs in the tech space are experiencing, because similarly, with early stage tech entrepreneurs, particularly locally founded ones, we're hearing a lot about the VC space, what investors are doing, what they want to see. We very, very rarely hear anything about the experience of actual founders and the challenges that they're experiencing and the changes that they'd like to see. So we're very much focused on how a tech founder is specifically engaging with the African tech ecosystem. So we're starting small, and we're just going to keep going until somehow, some way, we just kind of keep chipping away. And I think that's how I've been able to persist in this space, just every day working and hoping one day I'll be able to look back and see that we've reached our goal.
Mayo, do you think that Black Lives Matter globally will help or hinder or open doors, not make a difference? What's your read on for you personally of how you think that this
Sure.
may
Personally, I float between exhausted and excited. It's never in the middle. I'm either exhausted about the conversations that I'm having. I don't think I'm far enough away from it right now to see it as a to see a trend in it of like it's either it's moving towards better or it's moving towards worse or it's just staying the same. I think depending on who I've spoken to in that day, you'll hear me say, oh, we're moving in the right direction, or you'll hear me say nothing is going to change and everything is awful and we're just going to have to focus on ourselves and keep doing it and try to energize the team to just like not look at the news and just like focus on the fact that we're going to create a better world come hell or high water. I genuinely hope that all of the willingness that is coming from this and the new conversations that are being had will move people in a direction that allows them to see the fault or the error in the previous thinking. But as we know, structures are slow to change if it is not directly affecting you, your own life as a decision maker. I mean, I know so many people that have said openly, without recognizing the ridiculousness of that statement, saying, oh, I didn't invest in this thing, but then I asked a few friends and they said it was good, so I invested. It's like, well, so that person that created a business that has been working on it for years and years was only suddenly investment worthy when your friend said it was okay, as opposed to recognizing their hard work, the business that they formed, the product that they're selling. It's just a level of bias. Well, unconscious bias is the term, a level of unconscious bias that people don't recognize, obviously, by, as the term stipulates. And I think unconscious bias is a very, very scary thing because we don't recognize the weight of it. And I am worried that once the protests die down, once everyone is back at work, and once everyone is happy again, we'll just see everything move back into the silos of us saying things like, we're just going to focus on ourselves and make sure that we can do the best for our community, because that's how we've survived so far.
Thank you. Thank you. Linda, Fatu, do you want to comment on that? I think it's such an important topic that we need to understand and hear more about.
So for us, we've actually, so during all this time, actually, with the Black Lives Matter movement, we've been seeing more and more people tagging us, because with Imadi, we use Instagram quite a lot. And I didn't understand at first why we're getting all these tags of Black-owned businesses and people tagging Imadi as a company. And so that's one aspect with Instagram. But then you look at, when you go to the village, for example, all the young people who are growing up, for as long as they can remember, they have not seen a woman or an African woman coming to buy on a big scale, to export, or coming to place orders, or to work with the weavers. It's always been white foreigners coming, and then they have the Senegalese as the middlemen. So this is, I actually noticed that about 2 years ago, when one of the women asked me, one of the young women asked me, she was about 14, I think, and she had just come from school and we were working together, and she asked me who I was working for. And I said, for myself. And she was like, oh, but I mean, who's which patron are you working for? Because for them, they've seen only Westerners coming to work with the weavers to export Senegalese baskets. So when you had asked the question about to Bayo about her role as a woman and how she's being perceived. So I can relate to that in a way, when I've gone to the villages and they're not seeing a white man or a white woman to come to work with the weavers. And then with the Black Lives Matter movement, I mean, everybody, even in the rural settings of Senegal, has WhatsApp, has a smartphone, and everybody has seen the horrific images of George Floyd being killed, and it has kept me awake for many, many nights. And I think just even the women in the villages, they've sort of have this sort of, I wouldn't say rage, but just very upset. Excuse me. So yeah, they've been very upset, and they also want to maybe support me more in a way. I don't know. There is a difference. I don't know how to put it into words, but there is a difference, like a conscious decision that they really want to support me more as a young Black woman who is working with them and who wants to show their products to the world. And I've seen more and more companies who've contacted me and who've maybe come to me in the past and said, oh, we already have a supplier in so-and-so country. Like just in the last 7 days, we've had so many inquiries on the Instagram about working with us directly rather than our distributor who might be a Westerner. So I don't know if that's clear.
Okay. Well, we're getting to the end of the session now. We have some great questions still in the pipeline, and unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to them. I really want to extend my sincerest appreciation to the panelists who contributed to a very important discussion. We've only scratched the surface. We have a lot more to learn from each other. We have a lot further to go. And I think that if you have any other questions, we're all amenable to taking them privately. You can contact me or the Catalyst at info@catalyst2030.net, and they can put you in touch with one of us. If you, Melanie, Fatu, or I think we've, Linda, if you're still there, and Bio, do you have any anything that you'd like to end with?
Well, if I could just maybe end by saying, for me, we need more conversations like this. I think if we're really going to see change happen around discussions of access to opportunity, access to markets, access to change for women entrepreneurs in Africa, we need more people to be part of those discussions. We need more people amenable to actually changing mindsets and looking to collaborate in order to change the narrative and to be able to change decision making and to be able to change attitudes. So discussions like this are critical. But for me, you can have a great conversation. It's what happens afterwards. So it's about action. It's about people saying, okay, so there's a challenge. How can I play my part? What can we do? So for me, I would like to just say to everybody, great having a conversation like this, but let's see how we can collaborate to make real change happen. There are ways that we can do that and right away.
Yes, indeed. Bio.
I absolutely agree with that. I think in any of this, despite my, like I said, despite moving between excitement and exhaustion, the excitement is there. The excitement to see where we can move forward and what the world can become, and make use of the doors that are opening and will stay open in the midst of all after all of this is over, and really look to continue seeing the growth of the African continent, particularly in relation to entrepreneurship and investment and funding. Because I mean, despite the fact that it is still very hard, it has been getting better over the years, and I hope we'll see more of a catalyzing change and a growth across the continent as we go on. So I am hopeful in that respect, that 10 years from now we'll all look back and see that such an incredible journey has been undergone, and many positive things have come from it.
Thank you. Linda's saying that she has a wonky connection. Fatu, do you have any parting words? You're muted.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it also, I'm touching on this is what I would like to say as to finish, but also somebody had asked this question, whether the media takes enough interest in these topics, in women entrepreneurs in Africa, to maybe report on them. And apart from Jeune Afrique, I've seen some reports on Senegalese business and African entrepreneurs, but maybe that could also help. And this is what I was going to say, perhaps with the Lionesses Network, maybe work more closely with the media to get the stories out there, so that young African women can also see role models that we've talked about. And so I think the media has a crucial role to play in the future and advancement of African entrepreneurs.
Fatu, you're
someone asked a question in the chat.
I'm so pleased to hear you say that. In actual fact, we're looking for media partners right now globally. So if anyone is sat around this table that is in that space, come talk to us. We would love to actually be able to get more partnerships with big media agencies to be able to get the stories out there.
And there are a lot of stories. And on that very happy and positive note, I'm going to say good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. And thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And all the best. Thank you.
Thank you.